It's green. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate for those of you who are staying for this briefing that you take a seat and that you turn off your cell phone because we're going to begin. And we have a full program. I'm Nancy Skinner. I'm chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus, and the Legislative Women's Caucus is the host of this briefing this afternoon. And it is our second briefing of the year. We had a briefing earlier in the year on the whole issue of early care and education, child care, preschool, TK, those kinds of things, because those have been budget priorities for us. And now now we are having this briefing on the incidence of sexual assault in our California women's prisons. California has a zero tolerance policy on that issue. There was a bill enacted in 2006 that's referred to by its an acronym, PREA, which puts that forward and has a way for all of us to see data that our corrections officials will post on a website to see what kinds of what kinds of incidents have been reported and such, and then what the resolution, without a lot of detail, but it's there. And if you were to look at it, you would see that we've obviously not achieved zero in our facilities. And unfortunately, we recently had, and of course, one situation of a now former CDCR staff member being charged by a DA of many, many counts of sexual assault against over 13 incarcerated women, could be looked at as a isolated incident, or it could be, looked at as maybe an indicator of a much larger problem. And when we look at the PREA data, it would certainly appear to be a larger problem. And so the Women's Caucus, we have a series of pillars, and one of those addresses the conditions and treatment of our women in carceral facilities. And so when we looked at the PREA data and we saw the incidents of this one former CDCR staffer, we thought, this is really something that we need to learn a little more about and get more engaged in. So that is why we are holding this briefing today. And I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our Secretary of the Corrections Department, Jeff Macomber, for being here in person, and also our Central California Women's Facility Acting Warden, Anissa de la Cruz, being here in person, Jennifer Benavides, and apologies if I didn't pronounce your name exactly correctly, who is also with CDCR and their facilities, and also, of course, our other panelists who are Tess Borden from the Prison Law Office, Amika Mota, who is a formerly incarcerated survivor of sexual assault and executive director of Sister Warriors, and Colby Lenz. And we'll have introductions later, but I just want to thank all of them for agreeing to participate in this. And this is being live streamed, but purely for other people who could not come to Sacramento to be able to observe it. It is not something that we're creating as an interactive, and at the point that we have discussion, the questions will be by LWC members only. So in other words, women elected from the Senate and the Assembly, and if any of our women constitutional officers are here. The only other thing I was going to say is that we also have done a recent action in the budget, we being the legislature, where $1 million was directed in the budget to create a sexual assault response and prevention working group that involves CDCR and others, and a report will come back to the legislature next year, I believe in spring of 2024, for us to consider, meaning the entire legislature. But this, of course, we're hoping that briefings such as this will help bring our Legislative Women's Caucus members up to speed on this issue, so that we can then, as a caucus, think about whether there are either additional policies or strategies or such that we may need to help us achieve the zero tolerance that is in statute. With that, I want to turn to our Vice Chair, Assemblymember Cecilia Aguilar-Curry, to make her opening remarks, and then we will start with our panels. And so what we're going to do is have both panels speak before we have our discussion, and then the discussion, as I said, will be with questions from our Legislative Women's Caucus members. All right.
Great. Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate you putting this together, and I want to thank our staff for coordinating, because as you can imagine, these things are kind of cumbersome. You know, the headlines this year were full of instances of sexual assault in women's prisons. In every state, federal prison, county jails, and state prisons. It is prevalent. It's prevalent, and it has to stop. So it's with great honor that I'm going to introduce our first panel, and in this order. We'll have Amika Moda, served 7 years in prison and now serves as Executive Director of Sisters Warriors, a nonprofit membership organization that works with women who are incarcerated and re-entered to provide education, support services, and advocacy. Followed by Amika will be Colby Lenz, is a legal advocate with the California Coalition of Women Prisoners. Colby has worked with people in prison in California's women's prisons for more than 14 years. And lastly, but not least, is Tess Borden, is a supervising staff attorney for Prison Law Office, where she joined the staff attorney in 2022. Prior to that, Tess worked as an attorney for the ACLU, New Jersey, where she was appointed by the governor to the advisory board of the Office of Corrections Ombudsman. Welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you all here and to share your stories. So we go ahead, Amika, would you like to start?
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. Thank you for convening us here today, Senator Skinner and all of the Women's Caucus. The conversations normally happening here are about policy and how to create changes that will reduce negative outcomes. Today we're discussing how to change policies so that women and trans folks will no longer be assaulted by staff in California prisons. We ask things like, what's the number of assaults happening? What was the outcome? But we can't count the number of assaults, violations, and abuses in prisons because many will never be reported. They won't be reported because the abusers have the keys to their victims' cells. I am the Executive Director of the Sister Warriors Freedom Coalition. As Sister Warriors, we hear and witness survivors' experiences by creating a safe space within our communities. Our collective stories as survivors are entrusted to you today with the hope that we can move towards healing and urgently needed change. Change in the conditions and culture in women's prisons that allow for these abuses of power. I am also a formerly incarcerated woman who has served time at both of the California women's prisons, CIW and CCWF. My introduction to the culture of in-custody sexual harassment and assault began at the Orange County Jail. My bunkie, 18 years old, was told by a male deputy to play along, sleep nude when he was on duty, or he would make things harder for her, take away her phone calls, her visits, her day room time. At night, we could hear him outside our cell, his footsteps approaching on the catwalk behind our cell, the flashlight hitting my bunkie's mat, making sure that she was undressed, and the rattling of his keys as he masturbated outside our cell every night he was on duty. Staff and administration knew about this deputy, but nobody stopped him. When I first got to prison at CIW, an officer in my housing unit took a liking to me. He told me he could get me a cell phone for a good price, $700, if I would send him topless pictures of myself. This was common practice. Back in the day, calls from prison were expensive. Most of our families couldn't afford them, and the officers knew that. We just wanted to stay connected to our families, and they exploited that. Money wasn't enough. They wanted to degrade us. When I moved to CCWF, I experienced the long-term extreme control and sexual harassment that officers imposed upon us. It started with officers warming up to us, asking about our lives on the outside, our kids, our families. Some would say things to us like, "You're a good girl, you don't belong here." They tried to make us feel set apart and special. If an officer chose you or decided that you were their girl, it meant surveillance and harassment. You could never just be. They monitored our phone calls and our mail and who we talked to on the yard, asking who we spoke to and why. If we didn't give the officer attention, our daily lives inside became difficult. Some officers saw themselves as our saviors, telling us they'd care for us and for our kids and give us a home and stability. This type of attention from officers is confusing. In some ways, we think it could make our day-to-day lives in prison easier. It gives us an illusion of power in a powerless environment. But they prey on us, knowing how vulnerable we are. This is grooming. This is not consensual. They are our jailers. They hold the keys. A young sister warrior I was incarcerated with at CCWF, 21 years old, who was inside for the first time. Halfway through her 4-year sentence, an officer from her housing unit who had been grooming her began assaulting her in her housing unit, on the yard, outside work change. Another incarcerated person reported this quote-unquote relationship to admin. She was told she was under investigation, but not why, and she was placed in the SHU, or isolation, supposedly for her safety. She spent 4.5 months in the hole while this officer was investigated. After months of isolation and denial of privileges, the case was closed, she was released, and sent back to the same yard with him. The officer never received so much as a write-up and continued to stalk and harass her. She faced increased surveillance and harassment as she was now considered a threat by CDCR staff. After 2 years with no rule violations, she started getting write-ups every few weeks. Even though she wasn't the one who reported the officer, she suffered very real retaliation, punishment, isolation, surveillance, and harassment by CDCR staff. Her story is not unique. Women must perform for and be sexually available to prison staff to maintain basic needs. Exploitation and abuse like this run rampant throughout the prison system and in county jails, juvenile halls, and ICE detention facilities. The conditions, policies, and culture throughout CDCR allow this to happen. For many of us, our experiences in prison are a continuation of the sexual abuse and assault we've experienced throughout our lives. We have to hustle to survive and then are criminalized for surviving. Once inside, we are vulnerable to the same dynamics of exploitation, abuse, and criminalization. Many of us have never known safety, inside or out. We have no access to basic resources, counseling, or compassionate medical care as we struggle to heal from trauma and abuse. Sister Warriors looks forward to co-leading the recently convened Sexual Assault Response Working Group with CDCR to create legislative recommendations in a March 2024 report. We hope that CDCR will commit today to show up to that process with inclusivity and taking the lead from community. As decision makers, we are looking to you to stop this gross abuse of power and sexual assault. We need leaders to stop being complacent about this reality and work with us to reimagine our futures, a future of healing, rehabilitation, and community instead of abuse behind locked doors. Thank you for your time and solidarity.
Thank you very much, Amika. Very touching and sad. Next, we will introduce is Colby Lenz, California Coalition of Women Prisoners. Welcome.
Thank you so much to the Legislative Women's Caucus for your leadership on this issue. I just wanted to check in with the chair and see if there will be time to read Tasha's statement. Otherwise, I might draw on some quotes from it.
I think it would be important just for you to draw on some quotes, because
Okay.
I don't think we will have the time for
Okay.
that. For
Okay.
yeah.
I'll do
given
my
its
best
length.
time-wise,
Okay, great.
but I might
Appreciate
adopt
it.
a minute or two. Is that okay? Okay.
Okay.
So my name is Colby Lenz, and I'm a volunteer legal advocate and organizer with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners and Survived and Punished, and the Deputy Director of Policy and Community-Based Research with UCLA's Center for the Study of Women. I want to say hello and give respects to all of the survivors in the room who are formerly incarcerated as well. I've been working directly with people in California's women's prisons for nearly 20 years. I think that was an old bio, which has included working with many survivors of staff sexual violence. Sexual harassment and abuse of incarcerated people by correctional officers in California has persisted for decades. Today we are focused on the women's prisons, but we know that this culture pervades all state and federal prisons, county jails, ICE detention, and all places where we imprison children and youth. Most of this violence is never revealed because it is protected by a powerful, long-established code of silence and a brutal practice of retaliation against incarcerated victims who report. It is incredibly rare that prison guard sexual misconduct comes to light. The recent exposure of C.O. Rodriguez for sexually assaulting more than 22 incarcerated people at CCWF is an anomaly. However, Rodriguez's violence is not an anomaly. It exemplifies a pattern in which prison staff assault many, many people because they are helped by many, many people. In his case, there was at least a 10-year gap between him being reported for sexual misconduct and him being investigated. How exactly does CDCR defend that? Further, C.O. Rodriguez's strategic choice to sexually assault in a room where people prepared for parole hearings, among other unmonitored spaces, also mirrors a pattern of officers taking advantage of people in locations they are most vulnerable. Staff sexual violence persists in both monitored and unmonitored spaces, including in BPH hearing space, in medical spaces, in transport to medical care or court, also unmonitored in terms of transport to medical care, and other sites where incarcerated people seek health care and potential freedom. I'm going to cut a couple things. Given the common erasure of transgender, gender nonconforming, and intersex people in the women's prisons, I want to highlight that trans people in California prisons experience sexual assault at 13 times the rate of other incarcerated people. Despite efforts at reform, trans people throughout California prisons, including in the women's prisons, and more so now, continue to experience severe and pervasive staff sexual misconduct. Over the past 2 decades, I've witnessed survivors being terrified to report because of direct threats from abusive officers, survivors being blamed and harassed for the violence they experienced, being held in segregation and stripped of clothing and basic needs. As punishment for reporting rape, sometimes survivors are punished because someone else reported their sexual assault. These are survivors who manage the shame, self-blame, and loathing that is perpetuated by this system and that survivors inside and out of prison often grapple with. Most of these survivors are young women of color, the ones I've worked with directly, many of them sent to prison as youth. Many were convicted in context of also surviving child sexual abuse and family violence, which creates increased vulnerability. Some took their own lives because they were abused and abandoned by the system. For decades, these conditions have been largely ignored or denied by CDCR. Meanwhile, officers continue to sexually abuse incarcerated people, particularly women, trans, and gender nonconforming people. And some of these officers have actually been promoted to prison-level investigation units where they've been further empowered to enable and enact sexual abuse. So what allows this abuse to continue? Many things, including that officers create a culture of terror in a context of no substantive, external, and independent oversight of CDCR. The Office of the Inspector General, or OIG, is not adequately empowered to investigate state prisons, except when ordered by certain bodies. That is not oversight. It doesn't work. It's not working. We have the evidence. CDCR's responses to reports of sexual violence reinforces a closed loop of information that makes terrified survivors even more vulnerable. CDCR's official protocol when survivors report sexual violence includes strip searching victims for investigations and then isolating them in segregation. Informally, CDCR's response has been to protect a culture and practice of CO intimidation, including physical threats and attacks, denying access to people's loved ones, and other forms of abuse and intimidation. Finally, CDCR's internal investigative units have failed survivors completely. For example, a so-called sting operation that the ISU at CIW facilitated used survivors as bait, quote unquote, to catch staff who were reported to have sexually assaulted people, but did not do anything when the staff began to sexually assault those same survivors, allowing them to be assaulted again. So, what are the solutions? In just over a week, more than 80 community-based organizations have endorsed a set of recommendations to end the crisis, including a priority to expedite the release of all survivors of CDCR sexual violence. I urge every legislator and every resident in this state to understand that the state of California, in effect, is sentencing people to prisons where sexual violence is systemic. Reforms thus far have not worked, and they have often made things worse. PREA policies and practices are not solving this crisis, and they often increase danger and risk of violence. CDCR adapts and warps tools that are meant to increase safety to create more terror and enact more abuse. That is what happens on the ground, even if people are hoping otherwise. Reform hasn't worked because it's incarceration itself that has created the conditions of sexual violence. If the state of California wants to stop sentencing people to ongoing sexual violence, the only ethical beginning is the release of these survivors. And California already has the tools it needs to release survivors. So in recognition of the extraordinary harm survivors have experienced, CDCR must implement a process to expedite the release of individuals who have survived sexual abuse by CDCR staff. There are multiple mechanisms that already exist to make this possible, including CDCR should create a resentencing cohort for survivors of sexual misconduct, immediately reviewing and referring survivors. CDCR should use their existing emergency release authority to release survivors to safety. Many of these survivors are now witnesses in ongoing cases, and that is a very dangerous place to be while still incarcerated. CDCR or the legislator should require the Board of Parole hearings to give great weight to survivors of CDCR sexual abuse, adapting and improving current BPH policies on intimate partner battering to do so. And in terms of release mechanisms, CDCR and the legislator must stop collaborating with ICE, and in the meantime, remove ICE holds to ensure that survivors of CDCR sexual misconduct are released to their families and communities. In terms of Dublin Federal Prison, this has been a disastrous effect of survivors of sexual abuse there, then also being sent to ICE detention, which is terrible in terms of risk of abuse. I want to quote some from Latasha Brown, who is a survivor who is at CIW now after surviving abuse from multiple officers at CWF. As Latasha says, I'm here to amplify the voices of all women, cisgender or trans, inmate or staff, that have been subjected to violence in penal facilities. Because at the facility where I was previously housed, both inmates and staff suffered from sexual harassment or abuse. I would further like to add that this is not simply a CCWF thing or a Dublin thing. This is a systemic thing. Also, I'm by no means trying to paint everyone with the same brush by overgeneralizing, because not all persons employed by CDCR is a predator. I'm only saying that a uniform or a suit makes perfect camouflage for one. I want to forget, but my body betrays me as a vehicle carrying these memories. I want to forget the time I was taking a shower in county jail, only to turn and find an officer watching me. I want to forget being sexually assaulted by that same officer while I was handcuffed in shackles being escorted to the yard. I want to forget having a flashlight shone on me until I flashed my genitals. I want to forget what his hands feel like as they grope me, but my body betrays me as a vehicle carrying these memories. I want to forget the things that have happened to me at CCWF by multiple officers, including one whose name everybody in this room knows. My name is Latasha Brown, or as I've been dead named, inmate XO8560, and I have survived over 20 years of sexual abuse in penal facilities. In the beginning, I totally questioned myself. Why didn't I just tell? But tell who? I am guilty of the worst of human behavior. Perhaps that is why I didn't tell anyone of these encounters at the time. I even rationalized that my body and my labor were interchangeable commodities because I broke the law. So I remained silent. But buried feelings don't die. Intentions will always find a way to surface. She talks about how she eventually confided in a close friend. And then, since I am completely at the mercy of my captors, I have a feeling of perpetual uneasiness as I know the lengths they will go to cover up their misconduct. And finally, she says, prisons were initially built to reform, quote unquote, a place of quote unquote penance. but they have become places where society's throwaways suffer a litany of abuses by the ones who we hold responsible, or who are held responsible for our safety and security. Excuse me. Places where a culture of impunity pervades, which is reflected in this institutional abuse and the historical subjugation of all women. And though I live with the constant threat of retaliation, because as a prisoner I don't merit protection, I move forward with determination until there is a recognition of the importance of my personhood, the personhood of all survivors of sexual abuse in penal facilities. And finally, from Latasha, I remember the moment I learned that one of my abusers was arrested. No, I did not celebrate, because sure, when we experience harm, we want accountability, justice even. However, I don't think his punishment should be the final resolution, because it's an amplified response to just one person's abuse, not a response to the systemic abuse. And until our lives matter, I will not bow down or bow out in the face of unwarranted disciplinary violations, random cell searches, or fear as a means of coercion, because we are more than just a criminal index number. I just wanted to make sure to include that, since it's so brave and courageous of Latasha to speak out, and we'll move back. Thank you.
Colby, thank you for your words, but please pass on to Letitia that we really appreciate her sharing her thoughts and her story. And now we'll move on to Tess Borden, attorney, Prison Law Office, and welcome. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Skinner, Vice Chair, and members of the caucus. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your Let me say thank you for your leadership many, many times. So much leadership. Thank you for your leadership in convening this briefing and your commitment to addressing sexual assault and gender-based violence in our state prisons. As the Vice Chair said, I'm an attorney at the Prison Law Office, which is a nonprofit public interest law firm based in Berkeley. We have litigated against and also worked collaboratively with CDCR for decades, and I'm very glad that the Warden and the Secretary are here today. Thank you for that. I'd also, of course, like to honor Amika and Latasha and commend you for your bravery in speaking and say that you have all my admiration. The Prison Law Office has long reported on sexual violence and systemic abuse, impunity, and retaliation in women's designated institutions in our state. In 2016, we issued a report on CCWF outlining abuses and calling for changes. In response, CDCR hired the Moss Group, a consulting firm that specializes in gender-responsive strategies in the field of corrections. Yet unfortunately, many of the Moss Group's very detailed recommendations remain unaddressed today. And to my knowledge, CDCR has not yet reported publicly on the actions it has taken to implement those detailed recommendations. I hope CDCR will commit to doing so today. In the years since then, we have continued to hear harrowing reports of sexual violence from our clients and from our community partners. I spent a week touring CCWF in June as part of our Armstrong class action, which is about disability accommodations in state prisons. I was shocked. I was really shocked and saddened to learn, even after CDCR had referred Gregory Rodriguez for prosecution, that little had changed in the lives of my clients. Many people came up to me on the yard and asked if they could tell me about staff abuse. They recounted sexual harassment, sexual coercion, and rape. One person reported a devastating story of being raped by an officer late last year and then pointed that officer out to me. And notably, none of these stories were about Rodriguez. I am not asking CDCR to report on these cases today or any investigations or alleging that you haven't taken internal actions. But what I do know is that my office is continuing to hear that sexual violence, retaliation, and fear of reporting remain the norm for too many of our clients, and that CDCR has failed to address the systemic issue and bring true accountability and change. I want to be very clear that this is not just about bad apples. It's not just about Gregory Rodriguez and the 22 people CDCR has identified as victims. It's a systemic and now deeply rooted problem, and it impacts 2,200 over 2,000 people who live at CCWF and CIW2. This spring, we wrote a letter to CDCR asking them to acknowledge the widespread harm and secondary trauma impacts of Rodriguez's assaults and to make available trauma-informed counseling to any person living at CCWF who wanted it. We explained that simply making rape crisis hotlines available is not enough. CDCR's response to us was disappointing. They rejected our recommendation. I hope today's briefing offers an opportunity for CDCR to revisit our recommendation and consider many others, including those Colby has mentioned. In the time I have left, I'll briefly outline some of the systemic issues that have contributed to continued abuse with a view to creating durable solutions. First, there are systemic barriers to reporting PREA violations and staff abuse. In 2022, the CCWF PREA audit report contained 24 allegations of staff on inmate sexual abuse. The chair mentioned those. And while that's, of course, 24 too many, I'd suggest that for every allegation reported, many go unreported. Clients have told me they don't feel safe reporting sexual assault by staff. This, of course, is a phenomenon nationally and one you've heard from my co-panelists. And it doesn't just happen in prisons, of course, it happens in the free world too. Shame, stigma, and fear of reprisal keep people silent. But when people do report, they tell me that they often don't hear back on their 602 grievances, sometimes ever. CDCR has recently changed its policies such that staff misconduct complaints are now routed through a central screening team outside of the institution. This is a positive step. Excuse me, but most people don't know this happens, and they often wait months or even a year just to receive a piece of paper that says their claim was unfounded or not sustained. And when CDCR's Office of Internal Affairs does find something wrong, wardens still have final say over any adverse or corrective action. The Independent Office of Inspector General recently found long delays in that stage at the warden's desk. CDCR should undertake significant reforms to make PREA and 602 reporting processes more accessible to survivors. It should provide greater transparency to an individual complainant, including regular updates, and provide education on the investigations process to the prison population at large. And it should do so in an interactive format beyond just posted bulletins. CDCR is working on an early warning system statewide following our staff misconduct litigation and some of our class actions. And it will be critical that the early warning system adequately captures sexual violence reports and identifies systemic patterns, including as data points complaints that are unfounded or not sustained. CDCR should also commit to publicly reporting unidentified systemic patterns beyond their regular PREA reports. I want to note, I'm conscious of time, but I just want to close up by noting that these systems that I've pointed to all rely on survivors to self-report, and it places the burden, therefore, on survivors to step forward. I want to encourage CDCR as it's considering solutions to think about self-monitoring through training, appropriate expectation setting, and staff reporting mechanisms, including a hotline, which we called for back in 2016. I would be glad to talk in the question and answer about the ways the new body-worn camera policy, which has been rolled out at CCWF beginning this January, impacts people's safeties and our recommendations for improvement in that regard, as well as to build off of what some of Colby said about how CDCR can contribute to people's preparation for the Board of Parole hearing processes and make sure that sexual assault and trauma triggers are appropriately taken into account in those contexts. Again, I hope for the opportunity.
Appointed him to head the Corrections Division in December of 2022. And I will introduce the other panelists when we get to you. I think that's the easiest, but I really do want to express my appreciation for you joining us and helping us. I may not have expressed as strongly as I intended to in the opening comments in the briefing, but our intention here is we have statute, the PREA statute, that articulates a zero policy, a zero tolerance policy, and I think everyone here wants to achieve that. That is what we want to achieve. And so I appreciate their participation because all of us working together is what is going to enable us to do that. And so we've heard some suggested solutions and policy changes from the other panel. I've not asked our corrections officials to necessarily put any of that kind of thing forward, but if they have anything like that they want to share, it is completely available to you. But again, no pressure. It's more that we want to engage in this, and we share that common goal of achieving that. We do not want to see any type of sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment in our carceral facilities. So Secretary Macomber, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to start by thanking the Legislative Women's Caucus for having us here today, and I'd also like to echo the comments of Senator Skinner and Assemblymember Aguilar-Curry that we absolutely believe in zero tolerance, and I also appreciate the dialogue from the other panel members today and appreciate what you had to share today, so thank you for that. I just have some brief remarks that I'd like to share. And CDCR has two women's institutions, the Central California Women's Facility and the California Institution for Women in Chino. I am joined today by Warden De La Cruz, who can speak to the specific actions at CCWF has taken in the recent months to support the incarcerated women who were harmed by an officer who we referred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution, who's now currently housed in jail. CDCR resolutely condemns any staff member, especially a peace officer, who violates their oath and shatters the trust of the public. We take our ongoing efforts to prevent sexual assaults within our institutions very seriously and have several steps in place to do so, acknowledging that we have work remaining to do. CDCR continues to progress in addressing sexual abuse by closely monitoring all allegations of sexual abuse, staff sexual misconduct, and sexual harassment. Each allegation is investigated by a trained investigator and reviewed by the institution's hiring authority. If issues are identified, they are immediately addressed. And as noted earlier, those allegations are now reviewed outside of the institution by a centralized screening team that's under our Office of Internal Affairs. Through the Prison Rape Elimination Act, incarcerated individuals can report PREA complaints using various methods, including grievances, written notes, verbally, through third-party reporting. We also post information on our institutions to inform and encourage reporting, including to the Office of the Inspector General. As a department, CDCR appreciates the investments in audio-video surveillance that the administration and legislature have supported in recent years. Both CCWF and CIW are equipped with both fixed and body-worn cameras for correctional staff. They provide a critical preventative maintenance as well as a tool to hold individuals accountable when misconduct occurs. The recently enacted budget also includes resources for our department to establish a sexual assault response and prevention working group, as was referenced earlier, as well as an ambassador program. We look forward to working with the Sister Warriors Foundation in this effort. The work group and ambassador program will include convening and supporting working group participants to identify whistleblower protection best practices and providing trauma-informed care and support to survivors. The working group includes leadership and staff from the department, correctional officers, community-based organizations led by formerly incarcerated people, representatives from the ambassador program, and individuals who have survived sexual assault in custody. Our team is actively working on kicking off this important endeavor. The department has begun to transform the prison environment via the California model, drawing on correctional practices from Norway and other reform-minded correctional systems. The California model will reshape CDCR to improve the well-being of those who work and live in our institutions. As part of this implementation, CDCR is rolling out peer intervention training across the institutions in 2024 to all staff. The goal of this training is to equip staff with the tools necessary to recognize and intercede in situations prior to escalation, which creates a safer environment for all who live and work in our institutions. CCWF has been an early adopter of the California model for rehabilitation programming through initiatives like the Contact Officer Pilot Program and the Culture Change Council. CCWF aims to enhance the staff and incarcerated persons relationship and reduce conflict while fostering an environment of mutual growth and support. CCWF recently hosted a Bridging the Gap event, providing a normalized environment for staff and the incarcerated individuals to interact with one another with a day of activities such as having lunch and playing games together. As CDCR continues to improve processes and our environment, I look forward to working collaboratively with all stakeholders, including the legislature, to advance the mission of the department and improve outcomes, not just for the incarcerated population, but staff as well. So thank you for the time and allowing me a few minutes today.
Certainly. Thank you, Secretary Macomber. And now I want to introduce Anissa de la Cruz, who is the acting warden now at the Central California Facility for Women. She's been in that role since March of 2023. And apologies, I know you've obviously been with our corrections department for some time. I don't have that other information, but we appreciate your being here and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having us. As a warden, it is my duty and privilege to address you today. Our commitment to the safety and the well-being of the incarcerated women in our custody. With the recent incidents involving staff sexual misconduct and improper behavior towards those under our care, these incidents have deeply concerned me and need immediate action. Our commitment to ensuring incarcerated women's safety and their well-being extends beyond immediate actions and includes a comprehensive approach that seeks to prevent future incidents and create a culture of respect and accountability. We have implemented enhanced training focused on the detection and prevention of sexual misconduct, equipping our staff with the knowledge and skills necessary to identify warning signs of staff misconduct and intervene when necessary. We aim to create a proactive environment that reinforces the department's zero tolerance towards any form of staff misconduct. In the wake of these troubling incidents, my team and I have taken comprehensive steps to address the underlying issues and increase the safety of our facility. We have worked tirelessly to implement stringent measures in accordance with the PREA Rape Elimination Act policy and enhance the overall well-being of our incarcerated population. These efforts have included a proactive engagement with an inmate advisory council, fostering open dialogue through regular staff discussions, organizing town hall meetings, and setting my expectation on our duty to report staff misconduct. We've conducted internal pre-audits, consistently interview incarcerated individuals, and host informative presentations by community organizations such as the Victim Services of Madera County. Recognizing that the prevention of such incidents requires ongoing efforts, we continuously assess and refine our safety protocols. This includes periodic evaluations of our physical infrastructure, security systems, and surveillance technologies to ensure they align with the higher standards of safety and security. We also engage in regular assessments of our policies and procedures, seeking input from CDCR subject matter experts in the field of incarcerated women. Through these initiatives, we have sought to improve safety protocols, raise awareness among staff and the incarcerated population about PREA guidelines, and to provide crucial resources and support to those in our care. To further raise the safety of the facility, we have formed a specialized work group comprised of individuals with extensive experience working with incarcerated women. This diverse work group includes a director, associate director, retired annuitants, associate wardens, and other staff members who bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise related to the treatment and confinement of incarcerated women. The primary focus of this work group is to develop and implement programs and initiatives that promote safety, foster positive relationships between staff and incarcerated women, and drive culture change within our facility. The work group is tasked with conducting assessments of existing programs, identify areas of improvement, and recommend practices that align with the unique needs of an incarcerated women. It is worth noting that the work group's efforts extend beyond the confines of our facility. We understand that the safety and well-being cannot be achieved in isolation. It requires an approach that includes programs, policies, staff training, and the shift in the overall culture of both staff and the population. We strive to create an environment that nurtures personal growth, encourages rehabilitation, enhances communication, and reduces recidivism among the women in our custody. Accountability is of the utmost importance in addressing these incidents. It is essential that individuals involved in staff sexual misconduct or who had knowledge of staff misconduct and failed to act are held responsible for their actions. CDCR has established rigorous protocols to ensure thorough investigations into all allegations. These investigations are conducted with the utmost fairness and impartiality. When violations are substantiated, we take swift and appropriate disciplinary actions, which may include staff terminations, adverse employment consequences, or referral for criminal prosecution. These measures reinforce our obligation that we will not tolerate any form of misconduct within CDCR. Protocols for reporting staff sexual misconduct or harassment within our facility prioritize the safety and well-being of those affected. These protocols encompass a series of crucial steps, including the immediate separation of the victim and alleged perpetrator, the preservation of potential evidence, thorough medical assessments, obtaining detailed statements, and ensuring access to support services. Internal investigations conducted by specialized units play a vital role in gathering essential information for informed decision-making and appropriate action. Additionally, CCWF has recently assigned a sergeant specifically assigned for pre-investigations. Equally critical is the support and care we provide to the victims. When incarcerated women report incidents of sexual assault, we respond with urgency, empathy, and comprehensive care. We ensure that immediate medical services are provided to address any physical or psychological injuries resulting from the traumatic experiences. Counseling and mental health services are made readily available to help victims cope with emotional aftermath and facilitate their healing process. Additionally, we offer advocacy resources to guide and support victims, ensuring they have access to the necessary information and resources. We look forward to collaborating with the Sister Warriors Coalition. Collaboration and partnerships play a significant role in our endeavor to address these challenges effectively. As Secretary Macomber highlighted, CCWF is an early adopter of the California model. We've had several events that's intended to foster a positive relationship between staff and the incarcerated population. These events give staff and the incarcerated women the opportunity to interact by participating in games, recreational activities, and meals, creating a sense of normalcy. It also focuses on transitioning culture away from the us versus them and creating a more collaborative and rehabilitative environment. Several events have been brought to CCWF to help improve education, support, and opportunities for personal development. These events include Community Paint Night, Suicide Prevention Week activities, a youth diversion program, service dog training program, and peer support. I know I'm past my time here, but CCWF offers a robust education program. In a recent graduation event, CCWF celebrated 39 career technical education completions, 102 computer-related technology completions, 11 high school diplomas, 73 GEDs, 35 Associate of Arts degrees, 1 Bachelor's of Arts degrees, and 1 Master's degree. In May, CCWF honored 20 graduates for completing their Cal PIA pre-apprentice in construction labor or carpentry and healthcare facilities maintenance program. CCWF has also been active in promoting family reunification and has hosted many visits such as Get on the Bus, as well as special programs for children and their moms during Christmas, Easter, and Mother's Day weekend. I cannot overstate the urgency of our response to these issues. I want to emphasize that our commitment to the safety and well-being of the women in our custody is unwavering. I wholeheartedly acknowledge the gravity of the incidents that have occurred, and we are taking proactive steps to prevent their reoccurrence. Our dedication to the continuous improvement drives us to embrace strategies, partnerships, and resources that will help create a secure and supportive environment for the women housed at CCWF. And again, I want to thank you for allowing me to share this. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden De La Cruz. Appreciate it. And now we will hear from Jennifer Benavides, who is the Deputy Director of Facility Operations within our Corrections Department. And prior to that was the Acting Associate Director for an acronym which I don't know the meaning of, so we'll let you. The WIT? Program. So, Paul, thank you for giving me the words for the acronym, but go ahead, Jennifer.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. First, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge we understand the incidents that occurred, and we have taken immediate action to implement safety and security, and we understand those are paramount and very important. We must create a secure and supportive environment that empowers our incarcerated persons to focus on their personal growth and development. Recent incidents of sexual misconduct at the Central California Women's Facility have highlighted the urgency to improve the environment for all who reside and work there. We have taken several measures, as Warden De La Cruz has mentioned, to ensure we are on-site and in communication with the staff and the population. We have increased on-site visits and most recently have implemented an on-site resource team, which I am part of that. As Ms. De La Cruz has mentioned on the steps I've taken, I just want to touch on some that there's some external as well, that steps that are taken that aren't part of the staff that work there. We currently are conducting interviews with the population at both institutions. In fact, we have a team on site at CCWF today. And the questions are geared on their personal safety of themselves and others, if they are educated on how to report any sexual assault or violence, and how we could improve safety in the institution. We are on our second round. We have already conducted those interviews and at CIW, and we're back at CCWF again today. And those are with externals outside of the institution. Also, we have completed an internal pre-audit by a federal certified auditor to evaluate the institution's compliance. And also, I want to highlight that we have expedited the PREA training for the staff at CCWF, and we're about 90% done this year already because it is important. We will take all steps. We take all steps serious, and we are going to ensure that the safety of the population, it is paramount. We take this very serious. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you. As I mentioned when we opened, since this is a Legislative Women's Caucus briefing, the questions will be by our Legislative Caucus members. And so if there are any members in the back, if you want to come forward, it's easier for me to see you and call on you. So, but let me first call on Senator Maria Elena Durazo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the panelists, all of the panelists. I happen to chair subcommittee 5 on the budget that oversees the CDCR, and I also welcome, very appreciative of our new secretary to be here, Warden, and other staff of CDCR. This has been extremely troubling for me to hear the testimony, and it is not incidents of misconduct of what I heard today. These are crimes that are being committed, it seems like, almost every day or every day in some way or another. And so what I hear, and it's not fair to judge you, Secretary, because you didn't make a whole presentation, a detailed presentation on how the department will respond to this, but there's a big difference between treating issues that are incidents of misconduct and treating a culture where violence happens every day and where crimes are committed every day on these women who are incarcerated. So I guess my question is, and I've heard the term the California model and other things referred to like that, but this is extremely deep-rooted, it appears to me. And so how you take leadership of an organization where that's the case is really a different response to finding the bad apple and getting somebody who, you know, did something wrong because there was a report made, and that's really different. They're two completely different situations. So I guess, how do you hope to, and I know you're very committed, how do you hope to get to such deep-rooted issues and culture that we now have in the system? Thank you.
That great question, and I think there is, you know, a couple pieces there, and one is the California model where we're trying to change the relationship between the incarcerated and our staff. I think it's also very important that, you know, to reiterate that when we find and we sustain misconduct, like the Rodriguez case mentioned here, we refer that to the district attorney for prosecution. And so I don't view these as just an incident. If we're able to sustain allegations, we're referring those over to the district attorneys to prosecute those. So I am, as I mentioned earlier, pretty excited about the peer intervention training that we're instituting, which has shown a lot of success in local law enforcement to getting staff who may believe there's misconduct going or witness misconduct to intervene immediately, where you know, maybe in the past we haven't given our staff those tools to deal with that. So that's a full 8-hour course, and it's shown tremendous success for police departments. So we acknowledge we have work to do. I think we have the right folks in place. I think Warden Cruz shares my vision and the department's vision for zero tolerance and implementing a place where our incarcerated population, you know, can do what they need to do to become better citizens. Most of our folks do return back to the community. We don't want to make them worse while they're in prison. We want them to be a better, safe, and get the services they need. And so we will continue to work. I did appreciate Senator Skinner's comments that recognizing it's a, you know, collaborative approach here, and I think we do all share that same goal. So I hope that's helpful. And I'm not sure if I answered your question. There was a few parts to it.
I'm sorry if I can. If you could give me an example of where you're going to, where the approach is going to be different. Again, I appreciate the programs that the department has, from education to more money for cameras and visitation, although we can even do better on those fronts. But this is very extreme. It's almost like we're not facing people with getting the flu. We're facing a pandemic. That's the way I see this. So if you can give me one example where it's really going to be addressing a deep-rooted culture. Thank you. I'm sorry.
And so I think there's a couple fundamental changes we've seen in the last year that I'm really encouraged about, you know, the body-worn cameras and the fixed cameras. One, it serves as a deterrent, and number two, it gives us an opportunity to help sustain or potentially refute allegations. I think that is huge. Secondly, the legislature has invested heavily in allowing us to pull some of the complaints we receive against staff out of the prison, where the most serious complaints are investigated externally by our Office of Internal Affairs versus the prison locally. Because we've heard some stories of, you know, staff maybe, you know, investigating someone they worked with before. Now we have someone outside the prison doing that. And so I think those are two good examples of what we're doing. I think it's also changing the culture of how we're working with the population. I think we do talk about the California model of changing the mindset of staff. And I can't emphasize enough how excited I am about that peer intervention training. I think it's going to be a game changer for our department.
Senator Menjivar, you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much. Senator Menchvar, I represent in LA County, City of Burbank, and San Fernando Valley. I am also sub-chair of Minds Health and Human Services, so I have OICR DJJ on the juvenile side of this, which is very similar. You know, I think you shared, Colby, that this is happening in all various institutions, and we all are aware of what just recently happened with, you know, the youth coming out of DJJ being transferred to LA County juvenile halls and the disaster. But there were years and years of headlines of what was happening to the young girls in these halls and even the young boys, that finally this year, like LA County, for example, was scrambling to find placements for these youth, even though it was years and years of warnings, right? So I want to echo that I share, just like Senator Durazo, just the urgency on this. And for me, my niche is around mental health. And I think you, Tess, you mentioned that one of the requests were around required mental health services, trauma-informed services to victims and survivors of sexual assault. And Warden de la Cruz, I think you mentioned a little bit about that. So I guess I wanted to see where the, is there still a gap there, Tess, then? I'd like to hear a little bit more after what the warden mentioned.
So our request was that, you know, I think to, as your colleague Senator spoke about, to recognize that the impacts of Gregory Rodriguez's assaults were not just on 22 women, but on everyone who lives at CIW, and so that's 22,000. And so we asked that trauma-informed counseling services be provided to all of them if they wanted, regardless of whether they're on the mental health caseload and regardless of their reporting status. You know, CDCR does have a robust mental health level of care system. My understanding, and possibly Warden, you can speak more to that. My understanding is that, you know, that's provided to people either who report through PREA, you know, that they need mental health services tied to a specific incident, or who are, you know, otherwise assessed as needing regular routine mental health care, and their various levels of care within the mental health caseload. Our hope was that CDCR would make trauma-informed counseling available to anyone. And we analogize this to what often happens after, you know, a natural disaster, even in the extreme case of school shooting. You know, the recognition that it's not just primary trauma, but it's also secondary trauma, vicarious trauma that people experience when they witness someone they love go through something. We can talk about the Board of Parole hearing rooms, where women are continued to ask to prepare for release, continue to ask to talk about freedom in a room where they know their neighbors and friends were raped. All of that is traumatizing, and all of that is trauma triggering. And as Colby talked about, the vast majority of people, a disproportionate number of people at CCWF have trauma in their past. So I would encourage CDCR to think about the entire population and not just those who have reported and not just those who are identified as having mental health needs already.
Anything you want to add? We can leave it at that, but just wanted to.
I just want to mention that mental health services and counseling is offered to all incarcerated persons at our institution. I'm also implementing a lot of trauma-based programs at CCWF, focusing a lot on that. I've had several groups come in and request to come to CCWF, and I can't wait for all of them to start, because I do definitely think that the incarcerated population requires that type of trauma-based curriculum programs.
I want to add one more comment. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I come from a background of having to wear a uniform, and there's something about where you protect your own, right? And you know, there's this, you never throw your colleague under the bus. And when I hear people say, well, we have a zero tolerance policy, I know no one's going to sit here and say, oh, we're going to give people a slap on the wrist when they rape someone. No one's going to say that. So everyone's always going to say zero tolerance policy. But what does that really mean? Because in the military, it's zero tolerance policy, and my sisters are still being murdered and raped almost every single day. So, like, there's so much more that goes behind just that phrase. It's the action part of it that I still see missing. And it's just a reminder of just, like, people in uniform just tend to protect each other above everything else. And if you don't fix that at the core, nothing's going to happen.
And I think that's part of changing the culture. And I will say, you know, CDCR has a fairly robust employee discipline process, and state personnel board-wise, we're over half the cases. So we do hold folks accountable when we need to. There is still work to do in this area. We acknowledge that.
Assemblymember Pellerin, did you have a question you'd like to ask or a comment? Okay. Do you have to give the mic?
I just want to thank everybody for their honesty and their testimony today. It's really been helpful and educational for me, so, and thank you. We have a long way to go to get this fixed.
I have our Board of Equalization member, Sally Lever. Go ahead, Sally.
Thank you so
And
much.
I think you were in the assembly when PREA was passed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was and did extensive work on women within the institutions and within the system overall. And I have several questions. One, is there any outside service that is looking at how the proposed changes will be implemented for women with cognitive and developmental disabilities? I know that that was traditionally a very strong component of CCWF before VSPW was closed. So that's one question. Another is, will women that are in CCWF or CIW be able to see this hearing? And then my third question is, I've been listening to the proposals coming forward from the Prison Law Office, which seem very substantive, and after having studied organizational behavior for a number of years, the California model sounds really good, but changing the culture of an organization is like changing an individual's inherent personality. It does not happen easily, and it's not sustainable. However, structural changes and procedural changes, such as what the PLO is putting forward, would be the backstop to that. So what is the process for receiving procedural changes from the PLO and actually implementing them, or for the legislature to ensure that they've been at least considered and do or do not need to be put into a bill?
We did plan to put the recording of the hearing on the Legislative Women's Caucus website.
So I agree with you that culture change takes time, and obviously, you know, California is on record as wanting to adopt some of the principles of Norway and other countries that have a more forward-thinking process. We do know that's going to take a while. When you talk to Norway, it took 10 to 20 years, so we know that's the case. PLO writes a fair number of letters to us. I would say at least weekly, maybe multiple times per week. And we do take their input, because I do think we find value in some of the information they share, and they you have a segment of the population that feels very comfortable sharing information with them. And I do think we work actually more collaboratively with the PLO than we do you know, the alternative. And I think, as you know, Tess brought up, we do have a robust mental health program where any individual who's going through you know, mental health needs or has issues can submit a request to be seen by a clinician. And we do offer, you know, programs where, for those that do have a serious mental illness, they are seen by a clinician, you know, once a week, go to 10 hours of group therapy a week, and provide other services as well at even higher levels of care. I also want to give Warden De La Cruz an opportunity to jump into I know you had several parts to your question, and I think I missed a couple, but maybe Warden De La Cruz will pick up the ones I missed.
Especially the developmentally and cognitively impaired women. We know that women are in the system for a long time in some cases, and are there outside providers that have bona fide expertise?
So statewide, we have a program for developmentally disabled individuals where we provide extra services through our education and other needs they may have. That may range from prompting individuals who may forget to shower, as an example, or may forget to go to education. We have a process in place to prompt those individuals, and we actually cluster those individuals in specific housing units because we know they are potentially have a greater likelihood of victimization. So we also carefully screen those people that we house with them, recognizing that as a vulnerable population for us. And Warden De La Cruz may have further info to share on her prison as well.
No, I think you touched on all of it. At CCWF, we do have a DDP officer that also assists the DDP incarcerated population. Every day, that DDP officer goes out and ensures that they're prompting them to go to school, to make sure that they're able to file any kind of documents that they need, and give them the opportunity to do so, or give them the assistance to do so. But as Secretary Macomber had mentioned, we do have them in a different unit because they can be highly victimized. So we put them in an area where they won't be victimized. And there are special programs for them that they have to meet on a weekly basis.
Thank you. And just in closing, I'd like to really encourage that this hearing be made available within the institutions. I think that it is mental health to show that topics were discussed openly from multiple different perspectives, and the participation of the department and of the warden was strong here. And I think that would be important for the mental health of women within the institution. And then I'd like to encourage the legislative members of the Legislative Women's Caucus to really scoop up those policies and procedures from the PLO. And, thinking about Norway, which has an incredibly homogeneous population in terms of ethnicity, and if it took them 10 to 20 years to implement without the overlays of racism and other diseases that we have here in the U.S., I think that, it would be 40 years to do it in a diverse California. So some kind of default to a timely adoption of procedural moves, I think is very, very important.
Thank you, Board of Equalization Member Lieber. Any other Legislative Women's Caucus members that want to ask a question? I actually have one or two. And then we will wrap up. I think all of us are aware that assault against women, anywhere it occurs, anywhere, whether in an carceral facility or external, doesn't matter, the report rate is very low. Very low. And so, we could cite, and I don't think I need to, I think we can all, it's easy to understand why it would also be very low, or lower even, if you are in a facility where you are fearful about either retribution or, you may be in a situation, and this is always possible, you may be in a situation where the person you have to report to is someone either has assaulted someone else or maybe was who assaulted you. So there's lots of tricky circumstances. And there was an incident in one of my county jails where a correctional officer had sexual relations with, raped, to be honest, with two of the people in his, women in his custody. And he, of course, described it as consensual. And when the initial charges cited consensual. Now, of course, we know from the types of laws that we've put into place that say for, children or others, there is no consent here. So when you're in a imbalanced power situation, there is no consent. But I think that, obviously if you're in a carceral setting, if you are dependent on your custodial officers for, to prevent being written up, for example, which of course can impact your parole possibilities to, for any number of, whether you get the rehabilitative course you're looking for or any number of other privileges and such, not only why is a reason why you may be hesitant to report, but it also may be a reason why you may, and again, it's not consent, but say yes to what we know is absolutely not only a violation, but an assault and so I guess I said a lot, and apologies, but I really want to know is what are we doing to create the condition so that those in our custody, the women in our custody, feel able to report without retaliation. And I would add to that secondarily, if it has been found they were assaulted, what are we doing to, it seems to me if I had been assaulted and if there are anyone who is associated with it are still there, maybe not the perpetrator, maybe is not there, but someone we know that may have known about it or otherwise, then for me to continue to be present there is just, so on those two factors, what are we doing to both make a condition where those in the facilities feel completely supported and comfortable to report without retaliation, and then secondarily, if they've experienced it, what kind of remedies are we providing?
So taking a proactive approach, continually speaking with incarcerated population, I understand that sometimes this is the first time that a woman has come into prison and doesn't understand what's going on or how to report things. And I think reaching the incarcerated population in the reception center and starting that education regarding our PREA policy and our zero tolerance is of the utmost importance. Because in speaking with the inmate population, they don't even know how to access programs when they're in the reception center. So being able to provide that education early and then providing them with the peer support to go over there and educate the incarcerated population that, hey, this is wrong, this is not supposed to happen, this is how you access things, this is how you can report something. Also engaging with the incarcerated population, I'm always engaged with them. Every week I have a day where I interview inmates or incarcerated population if they send me a Form 22 saying, Ms. Dela Cruz, I'd like to speak with you in private. That gives them the opportunity to come and see me and report something confidentially or raise any issues. And just reiterating that you can report it, giving them the resources, the victim advocacy groups that come in, the different trauma-based programs that come in, and letting them know that they can report it without retaliation.
One more point. If we have staff members that are aware of misconduct that don't report it, we have a zero tolerance for that as well. In fact, it results in dismissal if you're aware of misconduct and you're not reporting it. So I just want to make sure that was clear as well.
To mention a couple more things. Warden Dela Cruz mentioned they did do some staff training with all the staff on the expectations to report and signs, and it was a see something, say something. that also was reiterated to all of the population that they had meetings with. But also, for comfort, we're really trying to foster a relationship with the population. And as I mentioned, we're on site doing the interviews. Like I said, externals are there today. This is our third time there. Also, the same individuals, we're out in the institution 3-4 times a month, walking by ourselves. You know, when I go, I'm not walking with the warden. I'm out by myself. I'm very familiar with the female institutions. That's where I started as a correctional officer. So I'm very, very passionate that the safety is with them. I've worked with the female populations 3 times in my career. This is the third. So I take this very seriously. But we are out on site, fostering those relationships, talking, and making sure that they feel comfortable and safe to report. And they have all of us access and our telephone numbers to do so.
Well, we are at our close, and I want to thank all of you for participating in this briefing. And as I indicated in the opening, I think the Legislative Women's Caucus, and I hope, and I think it's our intent, to take this up somewhat next year. Again, whether it's legislation or whether it's just further interactions, you know, it's not for me to determine how we, you know, what is going to be the end result. However, I think, as has been articulated, we want to ensure that these incidents don't occur, and that if they do, that our incarcerated individuals really do feel the circumstance where they can report without retaliation. And then I think also we're going to look to what remedies there are for those who may have already, you know, any of those individuals who you've already sustained the allegation, who may either still be incarcerated or who may, you know, be coming before the parole board at some point, to make sure that that is a factor in, again, not to already determine what the appropriate outcome is, but I think it is definitely something that has to be factored in a different way than it is apparent that has been factored so far. So I just appreciate all of your participation, and everyone here who has attended, and I know that you have attending, you're here because you care deeply about not only this issue, but just the health and welfare of our folks that are held in our custodial facilities. And as we've already discussed, we obviously know this is not unique to California state prisons. We know that it happens in the federal system. We know that it's rampant, unfortunately, even in our county facilities. But since the Legislative Women's Caucus being in the California State Legislature and having the jurisdiction of our state prisons, that is why we focused on that for now. We may choose to you know, engage elsewhere and on additional of our facilities, but the state prisons is what we decided to initially focus on. So I think that's what we'll do for a while. But anyway, thank you all again, and thanks staff for putting this all together. You did an excellent job, and appreciate your participation. We look forward to next steps. Thank you.